Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne on Global Voice Radio. Join Roxanne Derhodge and her thought-provoking conversations, the catalyst to live your life to the fullest.
Hi everyone, it's Roxanne Derhodge again with Authentic Living with Roxanne. Thanks so much for tuning in again. And every week we've been inspired by some really good stories about authenticity. And this week, yet again, we have an amazing example of someone that has been doing that in the world. And that's Coach Jim Johnson. Thanks for coming on, Coach Jim.
My pleasure, Roxanne. It's great to be with you.
So you're in New York. Is that where you are?
I'm in upstate New York, in a suburb of Rochester, New York.
Okay, so you're not too far from me because I'm right on the border with Niagara Falls and Buffalo.
Okay,
yeah,
we're
so
not
right
too far.
there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell the audience a little bit about your background, but obviously sometimes if I miss anything pertinent, please let them know what you think they should know.
Mm-hmm.
So you've been, Coach Jim's been in motivational speaking and leadership for almost 30 years, so for quite a long time. And you've been coaching winning basketball teams, high school basketball teams for that time. His powerful lesson came when he put a autistic team manager, Jason, into the final game at Greece Athena High School, and that's where they gained 20 points in just about 4 minutes to go. A valuable lesson, and I'm going to assume that that's a lot of the things that you speak about. So I'm curious to hear about that. He's written a book, A Coach in a Miracle, and he's going to talk a little bit about where you can purchase that book, Life Lessons from a Man Who's Believed in an Autistic Boy. Coach Jim speaks to corporations, associations, conferences, and conventions, but most recently he shared that he's been doing a lot more with leadership, so we'd love to hear more about that. So thank you for coming on. And Coach Jim, when I go out in the world and when I started in the field of psychotherapy years ago, probably almost 30 years ago for me now, I was always, wanting to help people. Obviously people just believe in themselves. And that sounds like that's been something that you've been doing, whether it's on a basketball court or if you're on stage or you're just dealing with a team. So I'm kind of wanting to hear kind of how you think about that and kind of what made you do what you did and still do today.
Sure. Well, my evolution is that I grew up in a sports family. In fact, my dad was my high school basketball coach. So, and I was the oldest of six. So sports was big in that family. And when I went on to college, and originally I thought I was a much better basketball player than I actually was. And when I got cut from my college team, it really humbled me. But I realized that I still had a great passion for basketball. And because both my parents were educators, I really thought that would be a field that would be attractive to me. So after I graduated from college, I got an opportunity to get into teaching and coaching. And my number one love in sports was basketball. And so it ended up being a great marriage for me because I was able to coach basketball and also through coaching and teaching, try to create and help people in their lives with life lessons. And, it's a great microcosm. Sports is a great way to teach life lessons if done the right way. And I evolved. I was very humbled early in my career. I became a varsity basketball coach at a local high school here at 25 years old, which is pretty young in your profession. And after 1 year and leading that team to 17 consecutive losses, I ended up leaving the job. The administration dismissed me. And that was a really difficult challenge. My wife and I had just purchased a home. I lost both my teaching job and my basketball position. But fortunately, I got an opportunity. I got a mentor. A local college coach called me and got me back on my feet. And ironically, his name was Bill Van Gundy, which your audience may or may not have heard of. But ironically, both of his sons have gone on and been head coaches in the NBA. So Coach Van Gundy really kind of got me back on my feet. But high school coaching was my real love, and I got back into that. And then my next epiphany was after 7 years in 3 different high school positions as a head coach. I looked at my record and it was something like 50-something and 90-something, which of course isn't too good. And my real epiphany was that as much as I thought I was a good basketball coach, certainly my results were not showing that. And that's when I really went head over heels in my early 30s in studying leadership. And I felt like if I was going to be a better coach and be more successful as a coach, I had to become a better leader. And so I've really been a student of leadership for really the last quarter century. And interesting enough, things started to change for the better. We started to have a lot of successful teams. I ended up going to my final position, which was at Greece Athena, a suburb of Rochester, New York, and coached there for my last 20 years. I retired 2 years ago to speak full time. But in those 20 years, we never had a losing season. Then I had another big stumbling block, and my stumbling block was that in coaching, you're often measured by how you do in the postseason. And there we were stumbling. We kept losing in our postseason tournament. And we got to the semifinals and actually lost for the 5th time in the semifinals when a young man came into my program that touched my heart deeply and changed my life dramatically for the positive. His name was Jason McElwain. I tagged the nickname J-Mac because I couldn't pronounce his last name. And he really, we became very close, and he became my team manager my last 2 years. But his big dream was he wanted to play in a varsity basketball game. And he tried out for our team 3 consecutive years and didn't make it, which is very unique. I was a coach for over 3 decades, and I rarely would ever have a player that if they didn't make it the first time would try again. And yet Jason didn't make it and tried 3 times. So he touched my heart very closely. In his senior year, I told him I was going to give him a gift. And the gift was I was going to put him in uniform for our final home game, which we call senior night. And that's what I did. And just over 4 minutes to go, I put him in. And it was really neat because the crowd gave him a standing ovation. And what Jason and I didn't know, one of our parents made these placards, these pictures of Jason's face and put them on paint sticks. And they showed it. And normally I'm a pretty macho guy, but I got so overwhelmed with emotion that I sat down and tears started to roll down my face just to see how he was walking in the game. Well, the game starts. Jason's finally in his first varsity basketball game. First time he touches the ball, he shoots a 3-pointer. The crowd stands in anticipation. Wow. He misses by like 6 feet. And I kid people that I know you're not supposed to pray in the public schools, but I was praying, dear God, please help him get 1 basket. The next possession, he had a much shorter shot, and this time it hit the backboard, hit the rim. There was a little drama to it, but it didn't go in. But I thought to myself, all right, God's starting to listen. We're getting closer. And then his third shot was a 3-pointer, and he made it, and the place just exploded. And I thought, hey, God must be a basketball fan. It can't get any better than this. But the interesting is, I kid people that Jason turned into his boyhood idol, Kobe Bryant. For the next 3 minutes, he just started making shot after shot. And the 2 things I'll never forget, with about a minute to go, I'm still sitting on the bench, tears still rolling down my face. I get a tap on my shoulder. I look behind me, and it's Jason's mother, and she's bawling her eyes out, and she gives me a big hug, and she whispers in my ear, Coach, this is the best gift you could have ever given my son. Of course, I was so touched. I cried harder. And then how the game ends, Spencer Porter, the other team that night, and I want to give kudos to their coach and their players. They were great sports that night. We score with 10 seconds to go, and our player takes it out of bounds, and normally he throws it to our point guard, but this time he threw it right to J-Mac, and J-Mac's dribbling down the court, and everybody's standing, and it's, clock's counting down, 5, 4, and with about 2 seconds to go, he pulls up like 2 feet behind the 3-point line. And I'm thinking to myself, Jason, don't shoot from there. That's way too far. He lets go this rainbow, swish. And I look over, and our student body runs on the court. Our players run on the court. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm living the movie Rudy. This is incredible. And then the other part I'll never forget is Jason's parents have an interesting dynamic. His dad is 6'6", and his mom is 5'2". And I see this little lady running through the crowd as Jason's mother, and she gets to him and gives him a big hug. And then our players put him up on their shoulders. He's got the game ball over his head. And at that point, at the end of the game, I had no idea how many points he had scored. And our public address announcer comes on and says, the leading scorer for the Trojans tonight, J-Mac with 20 points. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I said, if he'd played the whole game, he'd have scored 160. It was just amazing. So after that,
what an amazing story.
Yeah, it's and the interesting thing is, we had a really difficult season that I write about in my book, "A Coach in a Miracle," and as I mentioned, we had been at stumbling block of losing in the sectionals. In that year, for the first time in my career, we won our first sectional championship. So we and it put the cherry on top, and so. That was, it actually thrust me into my second career. I started becoming a motivational speaker. And then for actually the last few years, I've started another keynote on leadership, which we could delve into a little bit deeper if you'd like.
So tell me, that experience, I mean, you have been working with people, like you said, you recognized, if I'm going to be an expert in sports and I'm going to lead a team, I had to teach myself certain things to be able to have them gel in a way that it would seem seamless, but that they would listen to themselves, I would think, really, really deep and capitalize on what skill they were bringing to the court. So what kind of things that you learned that you started to apply that started to make a difference on the basketball court?
Well, a few things. First of all, as a leader, what I figured out after 30-something years of my life is when I started to read a lot about leadership and talk to different leaders, is I wasn't clear on what my purpose or my mission in life was. And when I developed that clarity about what I was all about, and I talk to people all the time about, and I ask people what their personal mission statement is. Most people look at me like I got two heads. And I said, but that really was a major point in my leadership career, was when I was clear about what I stood for. I understood my core values. I understood my personal mission statement. I have it in writing, and I can say it verbatim. It's to be an outstanding role model that makes a positive difference in the world by helping others make their dreams come true. And what I share with people that helped me immensely, now I help a lot of leaders, is that when you're clear about what you're all about, then your people that you're working with, your team or organization or business, whatever it happens to be, they know what you stand for. They know, what you believe in. And if you live that, and I talk about in my leadership talk of 7 keys to being an effective leader, but that was the huge thing from the leader standpoint. The second thing is I think I became a much better coach when I realized that I had to build a team on a daily basis. And what I really found the most important thing is you have to build relationships with your players. And early in my career, I did a very poor job there. I was always looking for the next play or whatever, instead of really the foundation of a leader is building relationships and building that trust, which I talk about. And when I started to do a much better job, and when I really, one of my keys I talk about is being an effective communicator, is when I turned that around, instead of me doing all the talking, I was doing a lot more listening. And when I listened to my players, my staff, that was the other thing that changed dramatically and helped us become much more successful.
So that's a good point, right? Because in my corporate consulting situation, what would happen is I would go into different sectors as the account executive that managed psychological services. And what we would find is there was a definite disconnect. So, whether it was, they had boards to report to, or, and particular targets that they had to hit. So what would happen is there would be a definite disconnect with the leadership and the front line. So because be it because of skill or inability to share the message, like you said, if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, but you also have to make money, understandably.
Right.
Oftentimes what happens is the frontline or the frontline managers would try to communicate directly to the frontline staff, who would say, well, they don't care. They don't care about me. What about me? Do they care about me? And that's often the one thing that I would hear from employees as I would kind of go into these programs. So, and what we found in some organizations, to your point, is when the leaders are able to share or show in some way that they care, then people are willing to do whatever it takes to make that company successful. But
Right.
There's such a disconnection that a lot of companies aren't, they maybe are figuring it out, but maybe it's the implementation of how to share information by levels down to the front line is where I often saw the problem as being. I don't know if that's something that you see when you speak to different companies.
Yeah, I definitely think that is huge. And, one of the things that I always, when I started studying leadership, whether it was businesses or coaches with teams, is that, you hear this a lot, we're going to build a family type atmosphere.
Right.
And yet, to me, a lot of times that's said, but not really followed through. And like one of the things I share with people is that when I took over and really started to try to make my program more like a family, one of the things I did is I gave a birthday card to every kid in our program, not just my varsity team, but all the way through.
Yes.
And it was interesting because I'd say to them, you know what, do you know how many other teachers or staff or anybody gave a student a birthday card? And it rarely ever happened. So it was a way just to show that you cared to them outside, that you took the time to realize when their birthday was and acknowledge that. And just things like that, people neglect. And, the old adage, I think there's so much truth is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think there's so much truth to that.
Absolutely, because in North America and with the consulting job that I was doing, 65% of people that came to psychotherapy or psychologists to get help was generally around relationships. But the relationships weren't at work. The concerns weren't showing up at work. What was happening, it was happening at home. So they would go and they would, what I quote unquote, function, like I would say. But were they giving, that full capacity to function at a high level? They would show up. Right? Maybe they'd give you 55, 65% of that.
Mm-hmm.
We call that in the field kind of presenteeism. I show up, I'm there, I clock in, I clock out, but I'm gonna coast. And with other organizations, when people are aware, like you said, and they really know, hey, Roxanne's been going through a tough time, or someone had a loss, or someone's child's been really sick, and you show that kindness to the employees. When time comes around where, business objectives need to be met, those people that you've touched are the ones that are first in line to do the best that they can for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I found a little thing that we started to do is that just talk to individuals and ask them simple questions like, how are things going? How can I support you? What do you need to work on that I can support you with? And, just showing that you care and that you're willing to listen and by asking questions is a really powerful thing as a leader.
And I think you have to be a conscious leader for that, right? To be able to recognize, look, I am, the CEO, I'm the leader. So I'm kind of up there and people are meant to filter things up to me and I'm meant to filter it back down and away. But sometimes there's a buffer zone that hits the CEO. Right. And he thinks he or she thinks they're getting the information, but sometimes people might be scared, not because they're going to lose their jobs, but they don't want to look like they're incompetent or incapable of doing their jobs. So sometimes the leader may not be getting the true information of what, their middle managers who oftentimes struggle the most, because they're kind of buffering from the top and they're trying to support the bottom, a tough spot in organizations. So what kind of tips, if people are leaders out there or if they're in organizations, what kind of tips would you give leaders? Like, sometimes the pulse that they may be getting, maybe, hey, things are okay, but it's not showing in your numbers or it's not showing in your productivity. What kind of guidance would you give to a leader if he would have come to you and say, Hey, Coach Jim, what kind of things should I do to find out what's going on?
I think the first thing is that you, as you're setting, objectives, goals for your organization, your team, whatever it happens to be, is that you have to get a buy-in for everybody. And the huge side thing that really was helpful for me is that we would get together at my house and we talk about our team rules, our team objectives, our team goals. But then the other thing is I would ask everyone individually to set their own goals, and then I would meet with them and find out how their goals align with the team goals and how we could support each other. And I think that's a real mistake. And that builds trust, is when you really care that you're going to meet with people individually and find out about their individual needs. And then as the leader, you have to fill that in. I think the other thing that was huge that you mentioned earlier that often, is if you want to be called the CEO, it doesn't filter to you, is that I really emphasize with my coaching staff that I wanted to know the good news, the bad news. And because often, like exactly what you said, players would go to my assistants because of that fear factor of my position and share things that they wouldn't share with me. The good news for me is that I built trust with my staff, that they would come to me and share with the confidence that I wouldn't go in like tattletale that, that my assistant told me that, whatever this, but I would use the knowledge to build a relationship with the player as well. And I think that's so hugely important that as a CEO, you can't sit up in your ivory tower and, just think that everything's hunky-dory if it's not. And that's where you really have to have the confidence that your staff, that they will trust that when they tell you bad news, that you're going to use it in an effective way and not come back at them, like killing the messenger type thing, so.
You have to have a pretty, you have to have your ego intact because you have to recognize that actually if you're getting the bad news along with the good news, that in fact, you're being a conscious leader at that point, because you're saying to your senior executive team or to your senior coaching team, like your staff, look, we want to be able to cope with this. I give you my trust, and I'm not going to tell you that it was Roxanne that told XYZ about such and such, but in fact you're going to use that information. You're going to go back to the team and maybe deliver it and say, I understand that we've been not giving you enough practice time, and it's come to my attention, and I'd like to figure out some ways to better facilitate that need for you. Help me understand what I can do, or maybe do you have suggestions? But I think it's a collaborative end that oftentimes happens with performance evaluations in companies, and I think with time it's gotten better. It's normally, okay, the company is going to tell the individual how they need to get better, but they don't allow the individual to talk to the company about what things they can do to improve as a company.
Absolutely.
So that
I think you're 100% on.
Yeah, that back and forth says, and they talk skills and subsets. But to your point, when I ran a treatment center, and I was quite young, like you, I was 24 years old, and it was an addictions treatment center. So everybody, I often joke around. I'm 5'1", and I was 24 years old, and I walked into the unit, and everybody, I swear, the men at least, were over 6'2". So there was me and 8 of them, and then a couple of others. So the main thing was their leadership was tough prior to me coming in, and I was this young person, just getting my first management job, and they had, reason to believe that I was going to fail them because they had leadership that had failed them. And then what I did intuitively, I just, like you said, I got to know each one of them. Like, what is it that I need to know about you that would help our relationship flourish with time? Because I'm new. Yes, I'm new. I'm new to this position. I don't have the answers. You probably have a lot of the answers about what's going to work, but help me, help you, and help the team. And that's kind of how I engaged them. And it took about 2.5, 3 years, I think, for them eventually kind of churning out and getting mad at me and getting mad at management and the whole thing. But eventually with time, they were a self-working team at the end, where I was able to consult with them for two days and be able to have them self-run the unit. So that's a good indication, like you said, right? It's about, don't come to speak to me when I am doing something wrong. And that's oftentimes what happens to employees. That's the only engagement they have: performance evaluation time, bonus time, those types of things, and kind of what can you do better. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I talk about, with my keys to leadership is building trust in your organization. And I talk about 3 principles about building trust. And the one that I really emphasize is changing as a mindset of a leader. Because as a leader, I know when I was a young leader, your mindset is, I got to critique. I always got to correct. Right. And when I changed that mindset and said, certainly that's still part of the job as a leader, that you do have to make corrections and critique at times. But when I started to share with people that I was going to try to catch my players doing right more times than trying to critique them, and praise them and reward them for doing things right, boy, that changed dramatically the trust factor, how the team was built, that this guy was trying to support you when you did things well. Because often I hear this a lot when I talk to companies, they don't trust us. They don't ever praise us. And, there's a lot to be said about that. Is find different ways that you can catch people doing right and praise them, whether it's verbal praise or sending them a text or an email, or even though it's slower. I still have a big envelope of positive notes I received from the years that you cherish those positive words. So, send people notes. That's something I try to do a lot, is when they do something well, send them a note, recognize that they'll greatly appreciate that.
So, and I think it's the little things, right? Like you said, and then, with the rapidness of our world, in corporate America, corporate Canada, we're on to the next thing. And there's such massive shifts, like at any given point within my portfolio, there was 35 to 45% of flux of, mergers, acquisitions, right sizing, all that kind of stuff. So it's rapid. And people are always feeling like it's what's the next thing. So a lot of companies would be on to, okay, we need to get to this, or we need to get, and people don't stop or did not stop. I don't know if this is your experience to relish in what they've actually achieved, like actually having a bit of a little stopgap where you're grateful and you look at all the phenomenal things that had been achieved in that game or in that last month or in that project, and kind of, highlight that for people. Wow, Jim, you were able to do this so beautifully. I learned something from you by watching you do this or that, because then, we get connected. And what we know as human beings is, as a psychotherapist, is that we mirror each other, and with mirror neurons in our body. So if I feel positive towards you, or if I feel negative towards you, that really kind of impacts that deep core space within myself. So, when you develop trust and you're feeling cared for, your mirror neurons start to kind of go in the same direction as myself. And then eventually, as a team, it's going to grow outwards from there.
I totally concur. In fact, I know I'd have a meeting with my staff before practice, and I'd say, you know what, today is just going to be a be positive day. We're not going to really tell the players that. We're just going to go in the mindset as be as positive we can, show our gratitude for their efforts and their ability to, and really focus on the positive. And, because I think you can really beat a group of people down if you're always negative, always on them. Certainly, Leah, as a leader, you got to have high expectations and, find different methods to, have positive outcomes. But I'll tell you, there's nothing like some positive feedback and being consistent with it.
Absolutely. And, to speak to theory, like in my field, what we talk about is really, at the end of the day, we all want to feel kind of warm and fuzzy on the inside, right? Mm-hmm. It's like kind of like that. I often say it's like that one warm fuzzy blanket you had when you were a kid. Regardless of what happened, we all want to feel that, but we also all want to achieve in some way. So you never know where you're going to get that kind of inoculation of positive, right? From it may be the guy opening the door for you, or it may be, the person sitting at the senior executive table. But I think it's that, and it sounds simple, but it's not easy when things are not going well and you're busy and you're stressed and all those things. But the gentleness of small little bits daily, to your point, and you said that, and that's what I think is very, very important, is small little steps often, instead of even giving them a lot once in a while. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And, I think you got to be very careful when you're the leader that you don't create, you said it earlier, and I'll emphasize, where your ego gets on, that, you forget about people and how to treat them. And, one of the things I really try to focus on, as I felt like I became a better leader, is I was going to treat every person I came across with respect. And often that's something, when I see people with power, they forget that. And boy, that usually leads to a detrimental situation. So you'll be very careful, that you always want to treat people with great respect, even when things aren't going well, and that you always have those ears open and be willing to listen.
Another thing that I see, or I often hear about, is that companies that are still doing well, they're still making, their targets, and they're superseding their targets, and they're getting acquisitions, but people around them are, dying on the vine, and they slowly leave, and they don't do the exit interviews, and they don't really, because the CEO or the senior management is still being told how great they are.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had conversations with leaders about that? Like how to kind of approach those situations?
Yeah, I again, when I talk to a leadership team of a business, I always talk to them about that. If you're losing people and you're not figuring out why, then that's something that's really you got to start changing your mindset. And that thinking, because you're right. Things can go well on the surface, but underlying it can be really struggling. And if you're, if you start, a cancer situation where it's, maybe if it's one person, but now it's a few people, and then it starts to grow, and you're not finding out the reasons why, and trying to make adjustments to correct that, that will lead to a travesty down the road. So, and it's funny because you see it all the time. Great businesses that were once icons in the business, and all of a sudden their ship is sunk, and then those are the types of things that happen. Is they forget, their ego gets in the way, and they don't treat people with respect. They cut corners, and all of a sudden bad things happen.
So in reference to going back to team, I think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say there's managers on there, or people are working with teams. What are a couple of tips that you would give them to really kind of at the beginning point to gel a team, to kind of feel like they have unity? What are some things that they could do?
I think the first thing that you got to be really conscious as the leader, it's a simple concept, but certainly I've observed it hasn't been practiced very well, is you got to lead by example. All right. So if your expectations are one thing, but you're, as I always tell our players, you're always on stage as a leader. And our staff, we always talk about how we conduct ourselves on a day-to-day basis is either going to enhance what we're doing or going to hinder what we're doing. And I think that's a really important thing, is number one, as a leader, that you are leading by example. If you expect great work ethic out of your team, and yet, you get there late or you leave early, you're sending a really bad message. So I think those are the things. The second thing I think with a team is trust is your foundation. So and I always talked about, I brought up lead by example because is the people are going to respect you more because of what they see as opposed to what you say to them. And if you're saying to them and what they see are working together and not against each other, then I think that really helps build the trust. And I always talk to leaders about is, the scary thing about trust is such a significant part of a successful team, is it takes time to build trust, but you can shatter it with one really bad choice. I'll give you an illustration. Like I always told our players the last 25 years I coached that I wanted to be a great role model for them. And one of the things I told our players and parents is during our basketball season is I wouldn't drink alcohol, which of course I could because I was a legal adult. But I felt that strongly as a role model that I was going to do that. And fortunately, I kept my word and it helped immensely. But I share this. What happens if I would have shared that to my whole group and 2 weeks later I get pulled over for DWI? Do you think my trust account would have been broken? I mean, it would have been shattered. I probably would have never gotten it back.
Right.
So when you make a bold statement and then you don't follow up your words, boy, that crushes that trust, which is such a huge foundation.
Absolutely.
So
trust is really the core determinant. And it's so funny when I think about what I do as a psychotherapist or a speaker or a coach, it's the same thing. So I often say to people, it doesn't matter where you came from, right? It doesn't matter. You can develop that internal muscle within yourself, because it may have kind of been pricked or prodded along the way. But once you kind of get centered and start to work on yourself, you fill yourself up. And then you really kind of can achieve anything, right? And it's really recognizing that. But oftentimes what happens is I think of, sometimes when you think of a dysfunctional team, it's kind of like when we were kids and we were in the sandbox and we were, throwing sand in each other's eyes. Everybody kind of, get the last kind of, thing in. And really, once we start to learn to be gentle and kind, which is really our capacity as human beings, then before you know it, the inside and the outside kind of start to match, and it becomes, it's kind of hard. It's like walking by somebody on the street. And I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, and everybody smiles at everybody on the street, right?
Uh-huh.
In North America, and I was quite young. I was 17, and I would get on the elevator, and nobody would smile. So I would smile and say, "Good morning, how are you?" And they would. And then after a while, guess what happened to me? After a while, I went, "Oh, I'm bothering them." So then I quit smiling, right? Yeah. So it's like anything else. It's that infectious element, or, they say that a smile is like a warm hug, right? To be able to show up, be nice, be kind, or even if you're having a bad day, to say, you know what, I'm having a tough day today. I didn't sleep, or XYZ. That people could respect that much more versus you just kind of cutting them down because you're having a tough time. So I think that conscious communication and authenticity kind of translates one into the other. If you're able to trust, if you're able to act as a role model and say, this is who I am, I'm going to lead you, but I expect really good things of you, I think you're right. People eventually kind of fall in line.
Yeah, I'm a big quote guy. I used to give my team a quote, and a couple of quotes I love that I share was, you can never be too kind or too fair. And another one is, attitudes are contagious, is yours worth catching. And I think that those are really powerful. Yep. So,
that's an awesome
attitudes are contagious, is yours worth catching. So,
I love that. That. That's amazing. So I know you have a book. Your book has just recently been updated. So I'd like you to share with the viewers where they can find that and where they can find you. Because I'm sure there's people out there, maybe organizations or even leaders listening on, or that may want to reach out to you and to use you for your services. So please let them know, or just for the average person that's listening and loved some of the stuff that you're talking about, just leadership, because we lead in our homes, we lead in our friendships, we lead everywhere where we go, and we can all truly be a better leader regardless of where we are in our lives. Where could they find your book?
So my book is called A Coach in a Miracle, and you can find it, as well as a lot of information, at my website, CoachJimJohnson.com. That way I wouldn't forget the website, CoachJimJohnson.com. And on that, we do a weekly blog that you can sign up for. We do a monthly newsletter. Those are all free. I also have a YouTube channel where we do a lot of videos on all the different content that I've talked about with leadership and building a team and all that good stuff. I really try to connect. I have a big LinkedIn following, as well as following on Twitter and Facebook, so you can connect with me. All that is on the website. And if I can ever help anybody with my services, I'm predominantly a keynoter. I do a keynote called Dreams Really Do Come True, which is a inspirational keynote. And then I do another keynote on leadership called Leadership Lessons from Half Court. And the other thing, I do a breakout session, because we spent so much time over the years working with our team on goal setting, that I do a goal setting workshop that I've done a number of times as well. So.
Fantastic. Well, I hope everybody out there, I've enjoyed this immensely. The translation from the court to the company it's the same dynamic, but we're just in different arenas. So thank you so much. I know this has helped me a lot think through things as I go out there into companies and also speak. So again, have a great day. But for everyone listening, thank you for listening for Authentic Living with Roxanne. If you'd like some more information on my products, and I'm offering a free video, 2 videos that you can sign up for, just about emotional relationships and intimacy. And you just go to roxannederhodge.com/sex. So, and those will be sent to you. So take care, and Coach Jim, you have a fantastic day, and we'll connect soon.
Thanks, Roxanne. Great to be with you.
Thank you.